If you're looking for an introduction to Roblox Studio in general, I recommend watching the previous video in this series first. This video will be an introduction to more of the programming side of making games with Roblox, and I'll be showing how some of the concepts explained in the last video can work in action. Anyway, let's get started. If you're like me when I started making games, you probably have no idea where to start with this whole coding thing. A good place to start would be, well, scripts. Now there are three different kinds of scripts in Roblox. You got scripts, local scripts, and module scripts. For now, we'll just deal with regular scripts. A script is a text file where you can write code, which is then compiled when you play the game. Script compilation is a process necessary for computers to understand your code. This is when it can look for errors and warn you if something might not work. It's important to know that while it can check for errors, it can't always find bugs for you. Sometimes conditions change mid-runtime and cause problems, but I'll save conditional statements for another time. To add a script to your game, first make sure you have the Explorer open. You can toggle this in the View tab, up there in the top left. Right-click somewhere you want the script to be stored in the Explorer, and hover over the button labeled Insert Object. This menu is where you can create almost any class object. For this case, we'll select Script. After creating a new script, click and drag it to change the location of it in the Explorer. To rename the script, select it and click on the name. A general rule for naming scripts is that you should name them based on their function. But this is an example script, so I'll just name it example. You can change the name of the objects in the properties menu as well. There are also rules for where scripts can actually run, but for now we'll just keep this in workspace. This is because there are two sides to Roblox games, the server and the client. A regular script cannot run on the client, because it is a server-sided script type. They will only run when placed in server script service or workspace, with some exceptions for very specific systems. The server-client relationship will be a topic for another video. For now, let's just open up the script. All you have to do is double-click on the script icon in the Explorer. Once you open it, you'll notice that a new tab has been created next to your main game view window. By left-clicking on these windows, you can navigate through multiple scripts if you have more than one open, along with going back to the main studio view without needing to close scripts. Hitting the X in a tab will close it, but avoid hitting the X on the main studio tab, because that will close the entire application. If you're working alone without Team Create enabled, closing the script should save your progress just fine. I'll cover Team Create in a future video. Now that you can navigate through scripts in the main view, let's get familiar with the actual code menu. This is where the magic happens. Code is written in lines, which means that when code is executed by the game, it runs the script in rows, starting from the top and moving down. You can perform multiple actions on the same line, but it's considered messy because it doesn't really follow general indentation rules. Indentation in code is the practice of putting tabs, spaces, and splitting up code in a way that makes it easier to read. Most of the time this is done for you when you hit the enter key, but Roblox's script editor isn't perfect. I'll explain the specifics once we've covered more terminology. Now you have this brand new script. Usually they're pre-packed with this one line that prints hello world. There are already a few things to take away from this default line of code. The data type and the print function. In the previous video, I introduced data types, which are exactly what they sound like, types of data. Here we have the string data type, which is really just text. In programming, text is almost always the string data type. In Roblox, you can represent text with single or double quotation marks, or double brackets, although double quotation marks are the most common. You can also use escape characters, but I'm not going to cover them in this video. Feel free to explore that on your own. In the last video, I also mentioned functions and parameters. Here, the print function is one of Roblox's built-in debugging tools that you can use to output messages. You can test this out by pressing the playtest button, heading over to the View tab, and enabling the output menu. If your script runs a print function, the output will appear here. The string value can also be changed to say nearly anything you want it to, as long as it doesn't contain the characters that you used to form the string, such as double quotations. This is where those alternative string characters can help out. The print function can not only take strings, but any data type. The data that you pass through the function, such as the string, is called an argument. They are almost the same as parameters, the only difference being that parameters are what you call the data expected from a call to a function. For example, the print function expects something to be passed through, so it has a parameter. The data that you send through is an argument. When one function can accept different data types, or orders of data types, this is called overloading. Each variation of the parameters of the print function represent each of its overloads. You probably won't see this word often, but at least it'll be familiar with you if it ever pops up. There are other kinds of output functions that you can use like warn and error, but they work the same way as the print function, so I'm not really going to cover those. Hey guys, by the way, do Alt and S and you can change your studio colors, script editor colors. Yeah, that's right. Now, it's time to try changing properties of objects. By default, the game starts out with the base plate that is stored in the workspace. A simple property we could change is transparency. This is a number between 0 and 1 that represents how transparent the object is. A value of 0 represents full opacity, and a value of 1 represents full transparency. By default, this value is 0. Let's start by making it halfway transparent, or a value of 0.5. First, we'll need to find the object. We know it's located in Workspace, which is a top-level service. This means that it can be quickly accessed using the game keyword. For the sake of simplicity, I'll use a quick and dirty method of finding the baseplate. I'll explain why this is followed later. First, we'll type the game keyword. This is a quick way of pointing to the game, which is the parent of all services. Because the workspace is the child of the game, we can directly access it using a dot and then typing the name of the workspace, which is just workspace. This is a basic way of searching through objects. Now that we have a pointer to the workspace, we can use another dot to check through its children. While typing baseplate, you may notice the script editor is trying to guess what you're looking for. You can use the arrow keys to move through this list and tab to autofill. You can also use this as validation that the object actually exists, although most of the time the game will be creating objects on the fly. In that case, you may not know exactly when an object will arrive, but you do know where it will be. Instead of manually waiting until it exists, you can make use of the inbuilt waitForChild function, which is a function of all classes. To use a function of a class, you'll first need an object path, and then use a colon, followed by the name of the function you wish to use. If we wanted to wait for the baseplate to appear, we would use game.workspace waitForChild baseplate. You may recognize some of the notation from the print function. The parentheses come directly after the function name and enclose the arguments that you pass through the function. You can have multiple if the function accepts multiple parameters. If you are unaware of what parameters a function is expecting, you can refer to the Roblox API reference manual at developer.roblox.com and search through classes. You can also check what class an object is by selecting the object and searching for the property class name in the Properties menu. It is a read-only value, so you cannot modify it. Back to the baseplate thing. The waitForChild function actually returns the first object it finds with the given name, the name being the string that you send it as an argument. Because of this, the whole line can be treated the same way as if you were to just have typed game.workspace.baseplate. You can add more to the end of this line, even though it is written differently than a regular object path. There are plenty of useful functions that all classes have to offer, so I recommend keeping the API reference manual on hand when starting out. It isn't necessary to wait for the baseplate to exist in our case, since it's here to begin with, but I want to introduce you to the way functions look at code. I'll just use the object path game.workspace.baseplate for now. Now, we still need to change the transparency. Roblox's way of checking properties is the same way as checking children, which can be problematic if one of the children in an object has the same name as a property. In fact, this is a common cause for errors. So to check the transparency of the base part, we simply add .transparency to the end of our object path. And now we have access to the transparency of our baseplate. The final step is to actually modify the value. We know that it must be a number between 0 and 1, and we already picked the number 0.5. So to set the value of the property, we just need to add an equal sign and a value. Now when the game is started, the script is executed, and the transparency property of the baseplate is then set to halfway. That's pretty much how simple object paths and property modification works. But wait! Remember earlier when I said this method was dirty? What I meant was the fact that I use game.workspace. Sure, it works, but it only works because the name of the workspace is workspace. You can change the name of it at any time, so it can't be trusted that it'll always work that way. Some other services also won't even exist until you call them to exist. And how do you do that, might you ask? Well, just like the waitForChild function from earlier, the game keyword has a getService function. The proper way to point to the workspace would be game getService workspace. It's just kind of something you have to remember. I don't expect you to have everything down just by watching these videos, so treat these as more of a guide to what you can do. Next time we'll go into variables and other data types, along with writing your own functions and running them with custom parameters. Hopefully I covered all corners here and cooled down any fears you might have had about coding. I'll try to answer questions in the comments and take suggestions to improve these videos. Anyway, here's a Rainbow baseplate. Can you figure out how to do this before the next video. Bye.